Hi guys, happy Tuesday. It's read aloud time, spring, according to Humphrey. It was great to see you all this morning. Um, Hope you're having a good afternoon, trying to stay cool the best you can. Let's get to it. We are in the middle of chapter 14. It's called On with the Show. And Mrs. Brisbane and her students are talking about jobs and roles that they're going to take at the family fun night. And Cassie gets kind of anxious and nervous, and so she's starting to have her stomach ache again. So that's kind of where we left off. So here we go. Cassie just stared at the floor and looked a little bit sick. When my friends left for recess, she stopped to ask Mrs. Brisbane if she could switch jobs and be a ticket taker. Why? Mrs. Brisbane asked. Cassie held her stomach. I don't like to talk in front of people, especially people I don't know. Mrs. Brisbane nodded. This isn't like giving a speech. You just stand there and say, step right up to the greatest animal show on earth. You can do that. Cassie didn't look up. I'm not so sure. You won't know until you try it, Mrs. Brisbane said. Remember the ideas we've shared about breathing and positive thoughts. Cassie nodded. This would be a wonderful way to practice those ideas, Mrs. Brisbane said. Let's try it now. Take some good, deep breaths and tell yourself that you will do a great job. I was unsqueakably happy to see Cassie use her deep breathing. Now, say welcome to Brisbane's amazing animal acts. Step right up and try the Humpster's Jungle Maze. Come try Og's Frog Leap Challenge. I loved Mrs. Brisbane's dramatic voice. Cassie said, That was great. Mrs. Brisbane asked her to try it. Cassie took a good long breath. Welcome to the amazing Brisbane's acts. Step right up for the, Humpster's, maze and Og's Frog Leap. Mrs. Brisbane smiled. That was very good, Cassie, she said. I know you can do it with a little practice. Give it all you've got. I hopped on my wheel and started to spin. You can do it, Cassie, I squeaked. Cassie laughed. Look at Humphrey. Mrs. Brisbane laughed. Can you try as hard as Humphrey does? Cassie nodded. I think so. That's all I ask of you, Mrs. Brisbane said. I squeaked in agreement. By Thursday, Flip and Flap had changed again. They looked like tiny frogs with very long tails. Why are the tails so long? Holly asked. Og just has a little stubby tail. Boing! I don't think Og liked having his tail called a stub. Joey explained that the tadpoles' bodies would grow much bigger. When they're fully grown, they'll have stubby tails like their Uncle Og, he said. Og dived into the water side of his tank and began to splash loudly. Just then, Mrs. Wright came into room 26. Excuse me for interrupting, she said. I'm checking to see if you're all set for tonight. Everything's under control, Mrs. Brisbane replied. I saw your signs about the hamster maze and frog leap. I want to make sure you're not talking about actual hamsters and frogs, Mrs. Wright continued. They're not allowed in the gym. My friends moaned and groaned. Mrs. Wright is very particular about her gym. I don't think she'd allow humans in the gym if she had her way. Is there a rule about that? Mrs. Brisbane asked. Absolutely, Mrs. Wright said. That's funny, Mrs. Brisbane said. Mr. Morales told me it was fine. Mrs. Wright shook her head. Joey raised his hand. Humphrey's been in the gym before. He was there after school, and in the holiday program, too. Mrs. Wright scowled. It would mean a lot if you could bend the rules, Mrs. Brisbane said. They really want to show off Humphrey and Og. Mrs. Wright was still scowling. She glanced over at our table. What's in the aquarium? She asked. Tadpoles, Mrs. Brisbane told her. Mrs. Wright shook her head. Strictly forbidden, she said. But the frog and the hamster can come, if they are contained. My friends cheered loudly. Thanks, 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 I squeaked, though no one could hear me over the cheering. Boing, 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 Og shouted. 3 cheers for Mrs. Wright, Rosie yelled. She and my classmates cried out, hip, hip, hooray! Hip, hip, hooray for Mrs. Wright! I think Mrs. Wright even smiled before she left room 26. Once school was over and the building seemed empty, I dashed over to visit Gigi. Og and I get to come to family fun night, I told her. At first, Mrs. Wright said Miss Mack couldn't bring me, Gigi squeaked. But then she came back and said the principal said I could come too. Hip, hip, hooray for Mr. Morales and for Mrs. Wright, I cheered. Oh, and my friends tried putting a clown hat on me, but I kept shaking it off until they gave up, Gigi said. Was that bad? No, 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 I assured her. Just because you're a pet doesn't mean you have to do things you're not comfortable doing. Thanks, Gigi said with a big yawn. I hope I can stay awake tonight. It was getting dark, so I scurried back to room 26. I was so unsqueakably excited, I took a long spin on my wheel to calm down. I hoped Cassie was doing some exercise too. A little while later, the door opened and Bob turned on the lights. I liked Bob, but I was a little disappointed. I hadn't seen Aldo for such a long time. Good news, he said as he started to sweep. You two will be seeing a lot more of me. I just got hired to be the permanent nighttime custodian at Longfellow School starting next fall. Oh, I squeaked. Boing, boing, Og twanged. Yep, Bob continued. Aldo got a teaching job. He's happy, and I'm happy too. I was happy that Aldo's dream came true, but it broke my heart a little to think that my good friend was leaving. I think that's a good place for us to stop for today. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. See you tomorrow. Bye.